a very wonderful turnout, and I just want to welcome everybody that's in cyberspace out there. We can't see you because this is a Zoom webinar, but anyway, I just want to say this is a big event. We're all very excited and welcome to CPPI Live. I'm Alexander Moore. I'm the director of the Institute, and I'm a professor of mathematics at the Westfield State University in Massachusetts, USA. And we also have David Bowers, who is going to be co-hosting the event with me. David's also a member of the Institute, a fellow, and is the new editor-in-chief of the Journal for Theoretical and Marginal Mathematics Education, which is the journal that we publish. This is a Zoom webinar, so the controls are going to look a little bit different if you are an attendee and you're used to going into Zoom meetings. This is a webinar just because we have so many people coming. And so you'll have some different controls at the bottom of the screen. We ask that you use the Q&A feature that's on the control bar at the bottom to ask questions. We have a program of 12 speakers or 12 parts of different speakers. Each one has question and answer time at the end. So if you put your questions into the Q&A feature of Zoom, we will address those at the end of each talk, each part of the event today. I also want to advertise, whoops, let me get over here. I also want to advertise a review of Critical Philosophy of Mathematics that Paul Ernest has written. It's been reprinted from the journal of the Philosophy of Mathematics Education Journal, and we have it at this link under volume 3, number 2. So please check that out. I'm going to turn it over. David, do you have anything that you want to say to get started?
Yeah. Let me real quick give everyone a rundown of the agenda that you can expect today, just so you have an image of what it is that you're about to experience, the kind of order that things are going to happen in, right? So currently, Alex and I are giving a brief introduction, talking a little bit about the webinar format. You will note that it's different than a typical Zoom meeting. So the fact that attendees, other than panelists and hosts, don't have that immediate video and audio access, that's a thing we do to preserve, bandwidth so that we don't get freezes or other things getting in the way of this. And you will find, as Alex mentioned, that Q&A functionality. So there will be opportunities for Q&A both after individual speakers and also sort of more broadly at the end. So by all means, please include questions down there. The overall plan for today, the agenda is roughly as follows. So the next thing that's going to happen is Dr. Kaiser is going to talk about publishing Ulla's work with Springer, and then we're going to spring into 3 different broad themes. First, themes from philosophy of mathematics. There you're going to hear from Paul Ernest, Liz DeFreitas, Jean-Paul Van Bendegem, and Karen Francois. And then the next theme is going to be critical mathematics education. You're going to hear from Dr. Valero and Dr. Gates there. And then finally, the theme of working with and being impacted by Ulla. And there you're going to hear from Dr. Moira, Dr. Marcon de Souza, and me. And at the end, we're going to close by hearing a little bit from Nikolai from Ulla's family. And then there will be time at the very end for some questions and answers.
And David, I just want to also give a very warm welcome to Nikolai Skovsmose, Oli's son, as well as Miriam Penteado, Oli's wife. Great to have you both here.
And with all that said, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn the mic over to Dr. Kaiser.
Yes, thank you very much. And it will give me this great honor to contribute to this webinar celebrating the launch of Ola's book on critical philosophy of mathematics, which was published in the book series Advances in Mathematics Education, Bharat Sri Raman and I are editing, and which is appearing by Springer. And I would like to very, very shortly say a few words about publishing the work by Ola. After we had published in 2023 the work by Ola in our series, namely the book Critical Mathematics Education, Ola announced very shortly afterwards that he's working on a new book on critical philosophy of mathematics, and he is intending to publish this new book in our series as well. And as you can imagine, we are very excited about this prospect. but he wanted a fast publication process. We did not anticipate that we would be allowed to publish his last book, his opus magnum, as we can certainly call his book. We received the first version of the manuscript at the beginning of July 2024. Negotiation with Springer started, amongst other, about the title. Should it only be Critical Philosophy of Mathematics without any subtitles, or should the subtitle refer to mathematics education? Ole insisted on Philosophy of Mathematics, as this title displayed the broadest interest. Springer managed to publish the book in less than 2 months, and who has ever published a book with a publisher knows how fast that is. Especially the Freudenthal Award Ole received by ICMA in July 2024, and the enormous quality of the book helped to speed up the process. And I really would like to thank the Springer staff for being so fast. Ole wrote to me at October 17th, 2024, I quote, "The book has just arrived to my address, the real paper version. I'm very happy to hold it in my hands. Thank you very much for the cooperation." Ole was highly satisfied with the fast distribution of his book, displayed in high numbers of accesses. And as usual, Ole started to think intensively about promoting his book by giving talks, distributing flyers with discount that was usually very important for him, and bringing in reviews. His death in February 2025 ended these activities. We bow our heads before a giant in our field and hope that this book, this opus magnum, will receive the attention it deserves. Thank you very much.
The next person we're going to hand the mic over to is Dr. Paul Ernest, who's going to talk about Ulla's legacy and the philosophy of mathematics. This is the point where I'm going to again remind you of the Q&A functionality. There's going to be time after every individual talk for us to answer 1 or 2 questions. And then there's also going to be time at the end to hopefully come back and answer a few more questions.
Thank you very much. And that was amazing, Gabrielle, that you managed to do it in 2 months. I didn't realize how quickly you managed to publish it. So that's amazing. And, you know, we're so grateful that the book was out and that Ulla could share it with us during his lifetime and that we could celebrate it with him during his lifetime. And what I want to do is offer, this is the contribute to the book launch. I wrote a review just to offer some thoughts, some themes from this book. And just to say that, I'm just going to move the bar up on my screen. Oh, no, I can't. Oh, yeah, there. So this is both a joyous and a sad meeting. It's joyous because we're celebrating the work of a genius, his wonderful work, his huge productivity. And even while staring death in the face, he came out with these books in his, you know, it's just astonishing, superhuman effort. You know, we're humbled by what he could achieve. We mourn his death, but we celebrate his genius and lifelong contributions. And here we introduce, launch, and discuss the last book published during his lifetime. Although Ulla, never to be defeated, had almost finished another book, which Peter Gates is working with, and so he was indefatigable. That was something more for teachers, and I don't know what the future of that is. Maybe I shouldn't even have mentioned it. So I'm here today. We're launching the critical philosophy of mathematics. And as Gabrielle said, there was an award honoring Ulla Skovsmose, which is, we can call it the Nobel Prize of Mathematics Education, was given to him last year. Before he'd published his book, it was based on the work he'd done prior to this even, which was so much, the Hans Freudenthal Medal, which is something really to celebrate, puts him up there. It's so nice that his stars-like quality, it was recognized by the institution. And as I said earlier, or as I said, we published a review of his book, the Philosophy of Maths Education Journal, dedicated the last issue to him, with little idea that it, and I'm so glad he saw it and was pleased by it, but with a little idea that it would only precede him by a couple of months to precede his death. So getting to the meat of the work. Ulla's lifelong project was the development of the field critical mathematics education. And the way I see it, there are 4 components with an emphasis on social justice and ethics throughout. 1 is a critique of mathematics education and the mathematics curriculum. 2 is a critique of mathematical pedagogy, how we relate to students, what kind of, well, all that stuff, the face-to-face stuff. 3 is a critique of the role of mathematics in society. Now, there is stuff going on about this. There's a sociology of calculation. There are various things that we don't really know enough about in maths education. But Ulla's created his own powerful version of this, the critique of the role of mathematics education, which I hope is going to leak out and inform the people in other fields around us, because there are people looking at some of these things. And finally, and most radically, a critique of mathematics itself he offered. And this is the most challenging, the one which there might be the most resistance to. And his answer is that which we are celebrating and exploring today, his critical philosophy of mathematics. This book, Critical Philosophy of Mathematics. And here he is, Ulla, so this was taken in late 24, where he had both of the books in his hands, very pleased with what he'd done, so far, so much, so good, and one of his paintings in the background. Now, the Critical Philosophy of Mathematics book has got 4 main sections. The first section looks at social complexities. He starts off talking about modernity and the Holocaust, and he talks about the glorification of science, domination by technology, globalized exploitations. And these are horrendous misapplications of mathematics. He doesn't start in with some dry theoretical account of mathematics. He says, look what's been done through and in the name of mathematics and by mathematics. Then he addresses in his next section the isolation and glorification of mathematics, how traditional purist philosophies are glorifying mathematics in its isolation from its application. Someone like Hardy, the mathematician Hardy, could say, nothing I've done will ever be any use, and only pure mathematics can be beautiful, only the purest, and I'm so glad I'm not useful. And he was a number theorist, and look what we do with number theory now. But he was glorifying in that purist philosophy. Well, Ulla takes him to task, and he looks at traditional views about mathematics and tries to offer them critiques in their own territories. Mathematics is logical tautologies, formal structures, mental acts, referring to intuitionism, and even mathematical practice, the latest thing to emerge out of the philosophy of mathematics, which he was very sympathetic to, but also critical of, in the sense that it focuses on what mathematicians do, but it may not be sufficiently critical about the role of mathematics overall. And then he moves on to the heart of some of his thinking about these things, indefinite constructions. And here he's talking about the openness, the indefiniteness, and how the abstraction gives maths its immense power. And then it's how indefinite it is with regard to its concepts, proofs, with regards to its topics and its applications. It's so powerfully applicable. And it's indefinite with regard to power, culture, and he doesn't even need to say ethics, because that comes in the next section. Looking at ethical challenges. And this is one of the key and novel things that he offers us, a performative interpretation of mathematics. It's not just this static thing. It's not just this bunch of equations or propositions or truths or Platonic objects or whatever. This stuff is really powerful. This stuff is performative. It's not neutral. It's not powerful. It's performative. It formats the world. And because it formats the world, it's responsible for it. So here is his section on the ethical challenge, looking at the performatives, the action, the ethics. And he also looks about taking it back to the classroom, which is his original starting point. Now, one of the things that the critical philosophy of mathematics addresses is what can be called the Benesaraf problem. how can mathematical knowledge and its abstract truths be used to generate real-world knowledge and applications? Because if mathematics exists in a separate abstract realm, it's so hard to see why it works so well in the real world. Why is it so unreasonably effective, as people have called it? And there's a picture of Paul Benacerraf, who had a long life which ended recently, and this has been, he didn't publish many papers in his life, but they were all very fundamental to the philosophy of mathematics and its directions and questions. But Euler's answer is that this is based on a false duality. And Euler's solution is to abandon the false Cartesian mind-body dualism to recognize, as I've already said, the performative nature of mathematics. This is so important. We know about the performative nature of language, and that was his inspiration, looking at the work of Wittgenstein and Austin and Searle, philosophers who talk about language. Language isn't just communicating. Language does things. It enacts. And Euler is saying, and you know what? So does mathematics. And so let me summarize in a little syllogism, a form of reasoning, the centerpiece of Euler's argument as I see it. Mathematics formats the mind and action, but the human mind and actions format the world. Therefore, mathematics formats the world. And this is a simplified way of putting it, that mathematics has to go through has agency, but it has to be enacted through people, through human choices and actions. The outcome of this is that the algorithm is mightier than the bomb. You know the saying, the pen is mightier than the sword. Well, this is even bigger. Because maths formats the world, the algorithm is mightier than the bomb. That takes, from moving from the idea that mathematics is this powerful, aloof stuff in a Platonic realm that it's got nothing to do with the world, to this notion of that everything around us, every iota of this communication, this talk, is communicated through zeros and ones over the internet. That everything in the infrastructure, not everything in nature, but everything in the humanly made world, virtually, is based on mathematics, not just zeros and ones to encode it, but ways of processing it. So you have these performative algorithms, and I got as an illustration, there's a group talking about disarming the algorithm because they also recognize, and they're concerned with the gun industry. But that was just an illustration of how we need to think about the algorithm is mightier than the bomb. Because algorithms are performative, they advise, they push, and they decide, for example, and this is just a small sample, who gets state benefits, who gets a loan, who is a greater criminal risk, what length prison sentence should the judge award, who gets social housing, what is your politics and what do you fear? And the algorithms can nudge you in a way, exploit your fear to nudge you politically. And this isn't theoretical, it's been done both for Brexit and the Trump election. What attracts, angers, or horrifies you? And the algorithm push your red buttons to make you vote, to make you buy, to make you attack minorities or speak badly about certain minorities. I won't even mention which ones. But here we have a weapon that has been used as a weapon, these algorithms, in a way that's so socially divisive and destructive. Also, what do you like to consume? What are your weaknesses? Gambling? British TV is full of gambling adverts all the time. And they all now say, oh, we want to only help you control your gambling. But really, what they're saying, we have to say that because really, we just want your money. And then they show people sitting around. They show this lady saying, oh, I don't mind who wins. I'm happy whoever wins. It's just a nice thing. It's my little me time. I relax. I enjoy having a little flutter on the bingo. And you think, God, this is so evil. They're trying to make poor or ordinary people part with their money for a moment of synthetic pleasure, and take their money. And then also what targets to kill on enemy soil, and how and if anyone can access power via AI. I mean, I was complaining about my internet connection last night, and I was talking to a bot. It was quite a helpful bot, but it couldn't do that much. It said, "Oh no, you have to ring back at 8 in the morning to speak to a human," because I'm having an internet problem. So all these algorithms, you know, the idea that mathematics is separate and that all this stuff is just happening through technology, all this offering us the link and saying, no, they are linked. You know, don't kid yourself. They're, you know, you might think all that stuff is neutral, but actually it's ethically, you know, responsible. All of critical philosophy of maths explores a number of themes, 6 themes or areas here. The epistemology and ontology of mathematics. He doesn't ignore these traditional things we look at, these traditional themes in philosophy. The methodology of mathematics, which is how learners learn and how mathematicians make maths. These are only viewed as partly relevant, although there is some interest. The applicability of maths. Why is it applicable? How is it applicable? What do applications do? And here we have the openness, the indefiniteness, and the formative. This is applications are usually not regarded as irrelevant. Maths and society, the immense power of mathematics to format society, to control manufacturing, trade, commerce, human interactions, schooling, and our identities. This is not relevant to the philosophy of maths. And finally, the ethics of maths. Why is it seen as neutral? Why don't we accept that it's socially responsible, like science? And why don't we acknowledge that it lies behind many of the greatest 20th century atrocities? These kind of questions are viewed with hostility as threats to the purity of maths and philosophy. And Ulla is brave. He's taking this on. As I said, social justice and ethics are central to the critical philosophy of mathematics and to all of his work. Mathematicians are starting to wake up to I have called it the ethical term, but actually it's an ethical imperative. And Ulla joined others in calling for a Hippocratic oath for mathematicians. Traditional philosophers of maths remain skeptical. Some philosophers of mathematical practice are opening to these issues of justice and ethics. And critical philosophy of mathematics makes the radical demand that the philosophy of mathematics must be critical, embrace its social role, accept ethics and social justice. And that would mean saying no to working on or facilitating certain applications. That would mean the community of mathematicians taking responsibility. What's done, it's not behind their back, but it's with either their collusion or with their turning their heads away from it. This is his biggest message, I think. But in my crude, quick summary, I haven't done justice to the subtlety of Ulla's philosophy. He addresses all sorts of philosophical arguments. I won't read out all the philosophers I named. He used speech act theory in a novel way. He looks on philosophically minded mathematicians. He responds to philosophers of mathematics, and he builds his own unique philosophy of applied mathematics. And I close by saying now is the time for Ulla's philosophy. We have never needed it as much as now, as we see all our life, all the world formatted by mathematics. As I say, the algorithm is mightier. No, yes, the algorithm is mightier. Things that are going on that I found on the web.
Paul, you're having some internet trouble. Perhaps we can move on to Dr. DeFreitas. David, what do you think while Paul's reconnecting?
Yeah, Paul advised us in advance that his internet is being weird today and he's on a hotspot. So yeah. Not per se a surprise there. The Q&A functionality, there's Paul again. Again, the Q&A functionality is there. Paul is back. If anyone would like to raise one question, we have time for that before we move on. But again, there will also be time for Q&A at the very end.
We don't have any right now.
All right. With that said, let us go ahead and move forward. The next person who's going to have the floor is Dr. Liz DeFreitas.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Alex, Paul, David, so much for organizing this, all the hard work that you do. Really excited to be a part of this conversation. I feel very honored to be part of the celebration of the work of Ole Skovsmose and to participate in this discussion of his recent book. So like so many here today, he was a huge inspiration to me. I entered the field of math education about 20 years ago, and I had a background in math and in the history and philosophy of math, and also in STS, or Science and Technology Studies. So I had studied with people like Jim Lambeck and Ian Hacking in Canada, and my graduate studies were the kinds of people that come up in this book. We studied work by Wittgenstein, Foucault, and many other philosophers of science and math, especially feminist philosophers of science. So with this background in the humanities, I was feeling quite alone in math ed when I entered it. And it seemed like there was a complex lack of complexity around thinking about mathematical practices. So when I found the work of Ole Skovsmose, I was thrilled. So Ole, Paula, Valero, Kathy Nolan, so many of you that I met through MES and ESM really helped show us how theory and how philosophy had a critical place in the field. So in particular, Ole's focus and concern with ethical erasure of mathematical applications in school math was something that I found very compelling back then. And I can see that that focus obviously has clearly been very crucial for all his work, including this new book that's focusing more on the philosophy of mathematics itself. So this is a hugely accomplished book, in my opinion. It's got a very wide aperture, very grand sweep. It encompasses vast histories and insights into the nature of mathematics. One of Ole's achievements, I think, is precisely this grand sweep of significant historical events and concerns, and let's say his skill at inviting readers into an issue or a historical development with only a page or something like that. And so I think for this reason, as someone who teaches a history and philosophy of math course in the math department, mostly enrolled with future teachers, I think that this book would be a fantastic book for me to use in this course. I think it's a great introductory book that all teachers should read, because I think it initiates them into the philosophy of mathematics. And I share with Ole a strong commitment to the importance of doing and investigating the philosophy of math, and the same desire that he has to see it be more than the dry analytical approaches that it was in the past. So like Ole, I think math education, teacher education should really incorporate this kind of work. In the latter part of the book, he encourages teachers to not just teach math, but to also teach about math. And it's this about math that philosophy does so well, history does so well, and of course, together, history and philosophy do even better. Okay, so the book chapters, there are book chapters on 3 conventional approaches to the philosophy of mathematics: the logicism, the formalism, and the intuitionism. But these are, as Paul was saying, they're enveloped by chapters at the beginning and the end that really insist that these 3 conventional approaches were never adequate to make sense of such a complex social cultural practice like mathematics in action. Now, this is not a new critique of these conventional approaches in philosophy of math. Many in the philosophy of math have complained about the earlier work and its direct link to the logical positivists and their intense fantasy of certainty and epistemic foundations. Ole writes often of how these 3 magi, as he calls them, were part of an ideology of absolutism. So for Ole, the real culprits, I think, in my opinion, when you sort of go through all the chapters and see how often someone gets pointed out, are the logical positivists. He says, quote, later in the book, "I see the logical positivists as launching the most ambitious project of inserting mathematics into an ethical vacuum," end of quote. And although he sees absolutism in mathematics research today, I would qualify this and argue that this assumption thrives even more powerfully in schools than in math research, based on my own research. But I borrow what is a perfect term, I think, that he invents and uses in this book, which is didactic absolutism. I think that's, quite a difficult thing for us to wrestle with. So what interests me tremendously about this book is how it suggests that the foundational projects, these 3 magi, in late 19th century, 20th century philosophy of mathematics, flourish in education policy in some sense, that they have contaminated it or influenced it. And what's interesting to me is not all of them have done so in the same way. And I think perhaps ironically, the story of intuitionism that Ole tells in this book, which is often told as though intuitionists were trying to bring math down to earth and reckon with its finite limits. And therefore, this approach might seem to kind of temper the desire for absolutism. I think that, in fact, this is, in fact, a story that could be well expanded and made much more complicated, perhaps in many future PhD projects that will come from this fantastic book, to show how a particular philosophy of mathematics and its allied approaches allied approaches of cognitive constructivism, other kinds of Kantian perspectives that infected a lot of theory and practice in math education. I think that this story could really continue to help us understand better what it is we do in education and what we could do. So the fields of philosophy and psychology have been kept quite separate historically, but of course they have also traversed these very porous boundaries. And I think Ole does really great work here in this book because he recounts these fascinating connections between someone like Brouwer, who's trying to create a foundation through intuitionism, a connection between Brouwer and Freudenthal, who of course shifts the foundational project in philosophy of mathematics to an educational project. And I think there are these beautiful historical threads we could continue to pull. So in chapters 8 and 9, these are two chapters I was quite interested in because this is where Ole, I think he says, okay, well, let's look at what else has happened that is in contest with these traditional, more absolutist agendas. And he mentions people like Imre Lakatos and Ruben Hirsch with their brilliant rendering of mathematical practice as a far more indelicate affair, not an axiomatic foundation project. They really fundamentally, and many others, I think, from the 1960s onward, helped us see how the practice of mathematics is much more complex. They use terms like fallibilism and pluralism, which Ole, uses but changes a little bit. So for Lakatos, this was really an effort to show how mathematicians actually distort concepts. They pull them and stretch them with what if not kinds of interventions. They're much more indefinite, informal, and that sometimes these become monstrous. Sometimes this is how the birth of a new mathematical concept emerges. So these chapters in the book, I think, are really interesting in how they play out in terms of Ole's critical project around its application. So Ole uses those in chapter 9 to talk about, as Paul said, the indefinite nature of mathematics. So how it's not absolute, but it's that the proofs and the concepts actually within them, there's also a kind of interior indefiniteness or indeterminateness or uncertainty, all of those things that people were putting under the rug in previous decades. And I really like this chapter, and it really resonated with my own efforts trying to use history to show how concepts like function, the infinitesimal, even proof itself are open to change, are situated, are in flux, and are constantly being negotiated. And so, as Paul said, there's a lot of recent work in the sociology of mathematics and in a contemporary philosophy of mathematical practice that's very flourishing. But this is where I'll close. Ole challenges those working in this new field of philosophy of mathematics who have turned to analyze practices instead of axiomatic foundations, because he thinks that this work is also just a little bit too narrowly focused. And this is, I think, maybe the biggest challenge that we have and that he continues to bring to us, which is, how to bridge philosophical investigations, which I think are so important. I think why I'm so excited about this book is because he's kind of excavated the philosophy of mathematics and he's bringing it back into education discourse. But how do we continue to do philosophical investigations into practices, and at the same time do what he wants us to do, which is to make those larger connections to ethical issues, how we care for a planet, which I would emphasize is more than human, and so to trouble some of the humanism that we often use in support of good mathematics, let's say. So this is really the challenge. I think it's one of the hardest challenges we have in this area of inquiry, and I think that this book in particular, of all his work, really puts that front and center. And so I'm really thrilled to see it out and about, and I hope that we're all going to take it up and try and use it in our work and in our teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Next up, we're going to shift the floor over to Jean-Paul. Alex, do you have his slides ready to go to share? Fantastic.
I do, yes. This one right
Okay.
here.
Okay, thank you. I'm probably acting here as a very typical philosopher because I've asked Alex to put up the PowerPoint for me. Now, in this very short contribution, what I want to do is I'll take the second point first, namely to think along with the critical philosophy of mathematics. So I will be talking about the CPM when I will be referring to Ole's proposal for a critical philosophy of mathematics. Now, I have been involved to a large extent into mathematical foundations, defending an even more and elaborating perhaps an even more stronger view than intuitionism, namely strict finitism. But with the emergence of the new field of mathematical practices, I should have used the plural there. I prefer to use the plural, mathematical practices. I found that it was extremely difficult to try to get together or to, well, not unify, that's too much, but to bring together ultra finitist or strict finitist views, where you do believe that you are getting closer now to the human agent, and mathematical practices. There still seemed to be an enormous gap between both of them. So what I want to do in honor of Ole is when you have a theory that is like CPM, that invites you to further develop his thinking. And in fact, it's, well, to be honest, it's the easiest thing to do because there's so much in there that needs to be further elaborated, to be further studied in detail, as already mentioned by Elizabeth. I think that I just want to give one example of one concept that I think that could be added to CPM. There are a few mentions here and there by Ole in the book, and that could perhaps help to get a better focus on the relations between foundations of mathematics on the one hand and the study of mathematical practices on the other hand. I will do it very briefly in a three-step argumentation. So the first step is on the next slide, please. I think that what the philosophy of mathematical practices has shown up to now is, and my preferred concept is heterogeneity. I think it shows mathematics not as a uniform, nicely structured building, to use the standard metaphor of the building, the foundations then being, I assume, the true foundations of the building. No, what I have learned over the years studying mathematical practice as such is that it is as heterogeneous as you can have it. I have 4 short examples because I assume that, well, whoever has read the book of Ole, and that's all of us, the examples are plenty in the book itself. There's no such thing as a single notion of proof. One of the things that he mentions is, of course, I mean, the use of diagrams. And as a footnote, it has taken quite some time to get away from the idea that proofs in Euclid in the elements are incomplete, that they need to be more detailed so that you can eliminate the diagrams. We are now deeply convinced, I hope so at least, that it is quite the contrary. There's no single notion of explanation, which I find very fascinating. I mean, you still have philosophers who claim that the explanation has nothing to do with mathematics. You simply prove theorems and that's it. But those who do believe that there is such a notion as explanation, that some proof can be explanatory more than another proof, well, I think there are at least 4 or 5 theories about at the present moment. At least there is now a recognition that in mathematics too, you can talk about thought experiments. But if you see the handbook on mathematical practices, then you see that there are probably as many notions of thought experiments in mathematics as there are thinkers and philosophers thinking about thought experiments. Beautiful. There's not even a single notion of beauty. And Paul Ernst mentioned Hardy. And it's clear that if you read Hardy, there's an emphasis on the idea that there's a single notion of beauty. But I mean, to make the contrast absolutely clear, take somebody who's perhaps less known because he more or less belongs to a French philosophical tradition, François Le Lyonnais. François Le Lyonnais in this amazing 2-volume book that he edited, Les Grands Courants de la Pensée Mathématique, the Great Currents of Mathematical Thought, actually advances that there are at least 2 notions of beauty in mathematics. One he labels romantic, which is basically when you develop a new mathematical domain. The thing you prefer is that there are lots of problems, because if that would not be the case, you have not found something fruitful. So you want it to be complicated and messy and so on. And then comes the cleanup period, and that he calls a classicist. So there are at least, well, there are more notions than of mathematical beauty than those 2. Next slide, please. Now, here's my suggestion. It's a suggestion that I think fits in very nicely with CPM. Namely, if you take the heterogeneous idea, if you then look at foundations, what mathematical foundations basically are trying to do is to make mathematics homogeneous. It's an attempt at finding homogeneity with all the consequences that comes with it. For instance, and that's something that Ole elaborates upon in the book in detail, namely that what you want to, well, the ultimate in a homogeneity is to have one single mathematical theory that can function as a foundation. And so hence aspects of the absolute enter into the picture. What I do want to emphasize here is that in terms of the performative nature, there's also in foundational thinking as well, there is in that sense, there are performative elements at play, because in most cases, it includes a promise. Namely, the idea that, okay, well, take a simple example, set theory in its standard formulation today, Zermelo-Fraenkel with axiom of choice, ZFC, as it is commonly called. Well, what you say is, look, if we talk in mathematical theories about an ordered couple, that's the example I've given there, no problem, we can rewrite it in terms of sets, so we can develop it in ZFC. And then the claim is that in principle, this could be done for all of existing mathematics. So it could be rewritten. And I've added here, if asked. So if somebody asks, really, can you reduce that to merely sets and nothing but sets? The answer is yes. But what you see is that hardly anybody is interested in doing it. So it's a very kind of curious promise. Next slide, please. And that's the final one. Now, something that Ole has defended in detail in the book is that the three magi, so as already mentioned, logicism, formalism, intuitionism, that they have all failed, and failed in 2 respects, namely, even within a single foundational theory, take set theory, there are too many alternatives within that single framework. And there are too many competitors around. I mean, category theory is still a theory claiming to have foundational features. The same for univalent foundations, etc. So what this indicates for me is that the attempts at making mathematics homogeneous basically only show that the heterogeneity cannot be eliminated. So in that sense, it is in support of all the CPM, namely that heterogeneity can be seen as a strong indicator of what he calls the indefinite, which I think is a beautiful term. So I think that both can go together perfectly well. And perhaps, and here I'm making a bold claim to end that, and I'm sure that Oli would have liked that, that the heterogeneity or the non-eliminability of the heterogeneity is an indicator of the social and ethical features of what mathematicians do in relation to society and humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I am gently modifying the way that we're running this from our initial plan to make sure that I account for time and make sure we leave time for Nikolai at the end. So I'm sort of informally incorporating the time that would be for a 1 or 2 Q&A straight into people's talk time, and then we'll just have that one block of Q&A at the end, just so everyone's on board with what we're doing right now.
Thanks, David.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to hand the floor over to Dr. Karen Francois.
Thank you so much. And although you are switching of the format, I will stick to the 5 minutes so that we have some time for discussion. So thank you for inviting me, Karen Francois. I'm actually the intellectual pupil, so to speak, of Jean-Paul van Bendehem, who was my supervisor. And I'm working now for more than 20 years at the Center for Logic and Philosophy of Science at the University of Brussels. So what I would like to do with you in these 5 minutes is to concentrate on what I found the most innovative part in the book of Ole Skovsmose's Critical Philosophy of Mathematics. And he proposes to speak about performative interpretation of mathematics. And actually, I will argue to move from interpretation to practice, to the performative practice of mathematics. I will explain why, and I will also give some background of myself. I think it's most important to position yourself not as a teacher in philosophy, but also as a teacher in mathematics or philosophy of mathematics. So to all math educators, I would like to propose position yourself before starting to speak about mathematics, before starting to take the textbooks in your hand and to start to teach the mathematics. Because then you immediately also, as Elizabeth mentioned, you start with some philosophy and history of mathematics. And this is so important. So to position myself, actually, I was raised as a phenomenologist. I was raised by the German phenomenologist Rudolf Böhm, who was actually very close to Husserl. And it is a bit related, and there is a lot of work that's been done about relation to Brouwer and Husserl and the intuitious foundation. So actually, from this point, I see some opening in this traditional foundation theory of mathematics, be it intuitionism, is that from there, you have a starting ground as a constructivist and actually as a co-constructivist, seeing mathematics as a human practice, which is founded in the life world. And also this notion of life world, which was coined by Edmund Husserl. Ole Skovsmose uses also this word, be it a little bit different from the phenomenological concept. And also from this phenomenological perspective, I think there is a first critical voice which is saying that if the Mathesis Universalis is seen as the method that you have to apply to all sciences, then this leads to the crisis of the European sciences. And this was the main statement of Husserl in 1936. And I did my PhD in 2008 on the politics of mathematics, and I was mainly inspired for the theoretical frame by Bruno Latour. Maybe actually he was involved in a huge project we had together with Sorbonne University, and I was very close to Latour, so I was influenced by him. But now, when reading the work of Ole Skovsmose, I'm convinced that I have to do my work again, starting from the theoretical framework of discourse theory based on the work of Laclau and Mouffe. I will say at the end again something about Laclau and Mouffe. So referring to the research that we are doing in my center and that I'm doing myself, is actually I was mostly inspired by intellectual fathers, mostly, also some mothers. But in the Center for Logic and Philosophy of Science, actually, the main research that we are doing with kind of nice group of researchers is on the philosophy of mathematical practices, also as mentioned by Jean-Paul van Bendehem in the former lecture. So the research on mathematical practices is really central to it. And I can also refer that we had the foundation of the Association of the Philosophy of Mathematical Practices in Brussels in 2010, and that Jean-Paul was one of the founding fathers. So I think if we want to have a critical philosophy of mathematics, we need a philosophy of mathematical practices that shows how mathematics is working in the real world. So I was mainly working in the Center on Ethnomathematics and Philosophy of Math Education, and I was informed and inspired by Ubi D'Ambrosio, Robert and Mara Asher, Alan Bishop, Paul Ernest for sure, and also Ole Skovsmose. So the inspiring, groundbreaking ideas that I got from Skovsmose, and I'm speaking about 20 years ago, is actually the connection from the beginning to culture, to diversity, and to equality. And another notion that I took all the time when I was writing articles, all the time it came back, is the notion of foreground. Because you have the background, and it can be a bit stereotyping of people, but with the foreground, you open the horizon. And also the horizon is a phenomenological concept. And I was very happy to see that in the book, also the foregrounding is, in the book I'm quoting there, foregrounding will refer to the students' recognition of their own prospects in life. It is not an isolated individual act, but it takes place in dialogue with others, being students, friends, families, teachers. So it's a collective process, and Ole sees the foregrounding, and he uses the verb, which is very nice, which is a practice, as being important learning, interact, bringing new dynamics to reflective inquiries. So now I'm coming to my most important slide, and this is a notion that I'm using. The incommensurability of programs, of, let me call it with the concept of Kuhn, the incommensurability of paradigms. So do we have still to confront ourselves with the Platonic interpretation of mathematics? And I call now the traditional philosophy of mathematics an interpretation, while the critical philosophy of mathematics, I would like to see it as a practice, as an evidence, not merely as a nature, not merely as an interpretation, but as a practice of the mathematics itself, for which we have a full evidence. And also in the book, Ole Skovsmose is elaborating and is giving a lot of examples, which was also Paul Ernest doing during his presentation, a lot of practices that we can see where we have full evidence that there is a formative practice of mathematics itself. So do we have still to confront ourselves with this Platonic people? I'm questioning myself. You can go on and debate this kind of belief, but so I'm puzzled about this. I would like to recommend to further investigate the performative practice of mathematics, and then it contributes to the formation of worldviews and life worlds, so it raises ethical challenges we have to do. And I want to close. There is a lot of work to do. There is more work to do. And Ole Skovsmose started his, let me call it foundation, or the literature he was referring to is first and foremost Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein came up with the idea that language is not just a description and a mirror of the world. Well, he did in 22 in his Tractatus. But later on, actually he didn't publish because he was a perfectionist. But in 53, we have the philosophical investigation, and it starts with a practice. People are building a house and are talking to each other and are making gestures, saying that bring me this, bring me that, and so on. And for sure, the same, because and he also relies on discourse theory, he's not using Ernest Laclau and Chantal Mouffe, hegemony and social strategy. He's referring to Torving, who is using, so he used Laclau and Mouffe in a second hand. And he's also for sure referring to Michel Foucault, the archaeology of knowledge. So there we have, in the notion of discourse, we see that mathematics, the agency of mathematics, for sure, it's not only about language or describing something, but it's acting, it's performing, it's making, and it's co-construction. So I hope that young researchers, and I have to supervise, that young researchers will continue to do this really important and innovative research. So thank you for listening and looking forward for questions.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Themes are, of course, semi-permeable membranes, so none of these themes are to be rigidly construed. But we're now going to shift from the theme of philosophy more towards the theme of critical mathematics education. And with that said, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Paola Valero.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this invitation.
Would you like me to share your slides, or did you want to share your slides?
I actually was thinking that you were going to share them, but now I have it ready. So
I'm happy to do it either way, whatever is.
No, I get it, and I control the thing myself. Just it takes a second. And it should be there now, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, you're good.
There we go. Okay. So following the presentations of the previous speakers, I actually decided to call this talk like this, on the shoulders of a giant, but moving forward. And somehow it is also what Jean-Paul suggested would be a move that would be in line with the thinking of Ole. So I refer back to the last time I saw Ole, and that was in Bergen, Norway, November 2024, on a PhD course on critical mathematics education. And you would say, like, what? How come Norway? Well, Ole, in his last years, as he says in his book, was mainly confined to his apartment. But reading and particularly giving talks in different places was a way for him to have contact with different people. And in that way, he was present in this course in Norway. And it was a very special course because, as you might know, or probably many of you don't know, there was another person who was very fundamental for the Scandinavian ideas about critical mathematics education and the politics, thinking politically about mathematics and mathematics education, and that was Stig Melin Olsen in Norway. So we were very pleased bringing together the older generations, the half old, and the younger generations in this course. And Ole was presenting this exactly book that we're talking about. And he was saying, well, with inspiration from different philosophies of language and discourse, I built this idea of mathematics and language as performative and mathematics as performative. And I think it was Paul and Jean-Paul, you had in your slides, like the whole range of inspiration that Ole got. And I'll come back to this point of the inspiration. However, I was thinking, okay, so where would new philosophical inspirations lead us to articulate other perspectives in critical mathematics education? And what would we call those possible new inspirations or new versions of critical mathematics education? And this was very much in the context of a course where in Bergen, some of our colleagues, younger colleagues, and some of also my students and I myself, and together with Liz de Freitas and other people who are also in the room, were trying to think, like, what do we have to say now with respect to the multiple crises that are in the world, and therefore, like the picture here on the right from environmental activist, Kenneth Brookwick, who was in our course, helping us thinking how, in which ways is it that mathematics and mathematics education can come to play into these times of crisis. And Ole, somehow, as I see it, Ole had, well, a very good answer. And the answer is, well, I've done what I've done, but if you can recommend me some things more to read, please send them to me, Paola, right? And I think that what we have heard already so far, in my view, is a very important work on which we have the possibility of keep on writing. At the same time, Ole was a man of his time, born in northern Denmark, having studied philosophy and having had a great inspiration. But if you also look at the particularities of the places from which he draws inspiration, there are very many philosophers of language, and they're very particular lines of the philosophy of language in which he builds. He also has lots of inspirations from sociology. And what I wonder is, of course, which are the limitations of that, of having thought about mathematics critically with that company with which he surrounded himself in his thoughts. And then there comes the critical question, of course, that the fantastic proposals that he puts forward have limitations. And a critical question is, for example, how is that critical philosophy of mathematics education? Is it a human culture center view of mathematics in action? And I would say that if the core, one of the core arguments of Ole is what Paul presented in his syllogism, mathematics formats, the human mind in action, and these formats the world, and then now I get messed up in the syllogism, but you know what I'm talking about, right? The mathematics formatting the world would be done with and through the humans at the center. And recent philosophies, or well, and not so recent anymore, of posthumanisms and very different neo-materialisms, which are inviting us to think and displace human-centeredness, to consider how all the other than human also play a role in the way in which we are relating and living together in this world. If we take those types of theories, if we take different branches of science, technology, and studies work, different feminist philosophers of science, but also very new branches of indigenous knowledge and thinking. So where would that bring us? Would we actually come with other ideas about critical mathematics that are very important for thinking about education now? So the moving forward is exactly that, with inspiration from Ole, and rather than following him and becoming really true and starting discussing whether that was what he meant or not, because he never did that with other people he read. And he got like a little bit upset on the way I formulated the question, because he said, no, you cannot say that I draw on these philosophers. I get inspiration from these philosophers. And that was pretty much the spirit of Ole. So what is the new work that we have in front of us? Probably all of us who are here in this panel we're old enough now, but for very many other young people for whom the world is still under creation and who will be reading other new philosophies coming. So which proposals do we have to create? And here I want to finish by referring to one thing that I think is fundamental. Karen, thank you for bringing the idea of foreground. That idea of Oler foreground, for me, is connected also with one of the very important ideas in, for example, a feminist philosophy of science, and it is that of imagination. So at the time in which we give up imagining, the possibility of imagining and thinking a new world, at that time, we are dead. So that imagination to keep on thinking other alternatives, building on the shoulders of a giant like Ole, but moving always further, what is it that we can keep on thinking to engage the world of schools and the world for what matters to us? And I want just to also show you this fantastic image. That is an image from the series Painting, from the Waiting Room, which was a series that Ole painted, inspired by the look of people in the eye when they were in a waiting room in a medical setting. So thank you very much, and let's keep on thinking together with Ole.
Thank you. Thank you. To briefly answer one of the programmatic questions in the Q&A, yes, this is being recorded, and the recording will be posted publicly afterwards. It's going to be at that same CPPI events page. You're going to be able to find it there as soon as it's ready. With that said, I'm now handing the floor over to Dr. Peter Gates.
Hi, thank you. I'm presuming you can hear me okay.
Yes, you're good.
Okay, I first met Ola in CPPI-ME 8 in Seville in 1996. The week previous to that, there'd been a PME conference in Valencia, and Tony Cotton and I were pretty angry about the way in which PME refused to talk about social and political issues. So we decided to organize an MES conference. And who else to invite to that conference but Ola? And he was one of our first plenary speakers. He's one of the few people who've done more than one plenary talk at an MES conference. And he spoke about the problem of democracy in maths education. 30 years later, that's still a very pertinent topic. Ole contacted me on September the 9th, 2008, at 11 minutes past 2. I've still got the email. And he said to me, all my publications go through language revision. Do you know anybody that will be interested? I prefer someone to do it for quite a long period of time so they get to know me. Well, what could I say? I said, yeah, I'll do it, because the chance to see Ole's work and see it before anybody else did during the construction was something I think would be a fantastic thing to do. And that started almost 20 years of reading everything that Ole wrote before he published it, including his 2 recent books. In fact, there was a third book that another book that he was writing that he wanted to get out quickly. I stayed up quite late, finished the proofreading, sent him the book about 2 or 3 days before he was unable to work anymore, and he closed his laptop, and that was that. And I think that book still exists somewhere, waiting for people to do something with it. But I learned so much from Ola. I was privileged to be given that opportunity. Whenever I asked questions or pointed things out or wandered outside the proofreader's brief, he responded both graciously and with a desire to engage deeply. That will be my memory of what I've considered to be a great man, thoughtful and compassionate, but also a colleague and friend, but also lived out his concept of critique as dialogue, because he was always interested in having a discussion about things from other people's different points of view. He was never possessive about his ideas or his work. And I'm sure we all know other academics who we couldn't say that about. This wasn't simply because he was a very nice guy, but he lived his philosophical orientation. His writing was working through ideas, and I saw that at several stages in some of his writing. If you've read the book or looked at the book, perhaps like me, you can't fail to be shocked by chapter 1. The opening of a book on philosophy of mathematics is about the Holocaust. And my first response was, when I first saw the first draft, is what's this about? But as you read it, you get more and more shocked as he talks about the operationalization of the Nazi Holocaust, but also about the responsibility that mathematics had. It was a Holocaust that was not down to a few crazed individuals, but actually it was on an industrial scale. And I think Ola was very concerned that not only was there the Nazi Holocaust, but there are other Holocausts around. And I remember discussing with Ola several other Holocausts, the Native American Holocaust, the Holocaust in Gaza, the African Holocaust, and several things as well. But he tells us in that book that mathematics is not automatically to be celebrated. And that's quite a challenge for us, and something I think we all need to remember. We probably all think that mathematics is wonderful and can solve the world's problems, but it also causes a lot of the world's problems, as has already been mentioned. Ola describes in the book early on how mathematics played its part in bringing about the design of the means of killing 6 million people. It wasn't just a few people who did that. It was the people who designed the trains, the people who drove the planes, the trains, the people who designed the gas, the people who built the buildings, the people who threw the stones, the people who broke the windows, the people who cut the hair, the people who did all sorts of things. And even these days, the 77 million people who voted for fascism in America, and also yesterday, the thousands and thousands of people who have voted for the far right in Britain. And today, my part of Britain has been overtaken by the far right. They had no responsibility, no councillors, no representation on my local area. They now control that area, and that's the same in various parts of the country. The thing about the Holocaust that I think Ola tries to point out is that it wasn't unusual, it wasn't strange. It was, in the words of Jeffrey Salkin, it was utterly normal. The people were carrying out things that were utterly normal. And Ola develops that into the concept of Hannah Arendt, who talks about the banality of evil. And that's an interesting concept, because Ola develops that idea through the critical mathematics education, and it brought him to the banality of mathematics classrooms, and mathematics in classrooms full of technique, oblivious to the context and the social context, what he called the exercise paradigm. And I think we all can see that around the world. Indeed, I would argue, as I think he would do, that it's probably the dominant paradigm. Those of us in this room are probably the outsiders here, because we're witnessing a political orientation of mathematics pedagogy. Another thing that I think I was shocked when I first read it from Ola was that he reminding us that all of our work, our fabulous work in classrooms and schools that we dedicate our lives to, takes place with a minority of privileged children. And I think that is quite shocking, that we need to remember that the children and the teachers we work with are privileged. I remember watching a video of a project in Tanzania in a classroom, a maths classroom with 60 children. No ceiling, no textbooks, no calculators, no computers, no interactive whiteboards, no electricity. But every single child had a pristine school uniform. And that kind of shocks me, because it's so normal. And I think sometimes we don't even notice the subtle ways in which control takes place. Marx told us that philosophers merely interpret the world. Ola was the philosopher, but I don't think he merely interpreted the world. As a philosopher, he offered us an alternative, and that's already been mentioned several times. In fact, this book called Foregrounds shows us an example of some of the things that he was doing around the world. He talks about students, he talks about students' lives, he talks about what they're engaged in, and questions and problems that are really of value to them, that can change their lives. And that for me is about critical philosophy of mathematics and how it needs to be interpreted. And that's what Ola leaves me with. I must admit, I'm still at the denial stage, and I'm sure many of us are. And I had to keep reminding myself that no, I couldn't send him an email to ask him about this presentation because he's no longer with us. And that I'm still moved and shocked with. But what I'm pleased with is that he's left us with such a canon of work that we can read and read and read several times and hopefully make some changes to what happens in classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, these themes are semi-permeable membranes, so topics are going to drift from one to the other. But we're now shifting to our third and final theme, which is more about the experience of working with Uli and sort of the legacy and his impact on us. So with that said, the floor now goes to Dr. Amanda Moya.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I prepared a text that I will read for you. It is with a mix of joy and longing that I'm here today to speak about Oli, a person who to me was much more than a professor or theoretical reference. Oli was a dear friend from whom I learned a lot about mathematics education, philosophy, and most importantly, about life. Over the last 10 years, I had the privilege to be close to Oli, sharing ideas, concerns, and dreams through our passion for mathematics education and our hope for a more equitable, inclusive, democratic, and ethical world. Working with him felt like being a space of freedom and listening. Oli didn't merely teach concepts. He taught how to think bravely, to doubt, to dream of other possible worlds, and above all, other ways of teaching, learning, and relating to mathematics. In 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, while many of us felt discouraged by isolation, Oli, who was already in a fragile health condition and had limited mobility, he interpreted online activities as opportunities for dialogue and virtual travels to different regions of Brazil and the world through computer screens. Weekly meetings with research group previously held in person at a bakery adopted new formats, as did lectures and classes. A new world opened for Oli, and with it came his desire to speak about the philosophy of mathematics in a graduate course. In 2021, I received an invitation to assist him with the administrative work required to run the course. When describing his initial ideas for the discipline, for the course, Oli emphasized, I have in mind a course concentrated on philosophy of mathematics and not on philosophy of mathematics education. I would start discussing logicism, formalism, and intuitionism, but concentrate on recent developments in this philosophy. The main text should be the Oli Rawls and my book Connecting Humans to Equation, a interpretation of philosophy of mathematics. This course was titled A Interpretation of Philosophy of Mathematics. It was offered by me and Oli in the first semester of 2022 to students in the graduate program in mathematics education at Unesp Rio Claro. In the second, and again, in the second semester of 2023, and in the second semester in 2023, Renato joined us to offer the course also to students of the graduate program in science education at Unifesp. The offering of these courses was certainly one of the main sources of inspiration for writing this book. While carefully preparing each slide of his lectures, Oli also found inspiration for the book. In its 2 editions, The course interpretation of the philosophy of mathematics become one of those vibrant spaces where ideas pulsed and where questions were more important than answers. Fortunately, I was able to witness closely the birth of many reflections that later took shape in this book, Critical Philosophy of Mathematics. Although the course focused on the philosophy of mathematics reflections and possible connections to critical mathematics educations were recurring themes in the classes. Questions such as, what is the connection between critical mathematics education and philosophy of mathematics? Is it possible to think about a critical philosophy of mathematics? Or what philosophy of mathematics does a critical mathematics education adopt? Were posed by Oli to students multiple times. In our conversations on his apartment's balcony, Oli would express his enthusiasm for the course and the students' engagements, which inspired him in writing his new book. A work that certainly contains many answers to the questions students had asked him during classes. Another significant space for dialogue and reflections, which also inspired the book, was our own research group and the investigations of its doctoral students. Oli always deeply valued collective work and often shared his texts with the group to receive suggestions for improvement or ideas that could be included or expanded. This book was no different. In particular, chapter 16, the last to be written, which required a collective effort to gather the data Oli wanted to exemplify the ideas in the text. This was the final chapter completed, perhaps the most challenged, but without doubt the most discussed and collectively developed. Oli was never a just brilliant thinker. He was also, and perhaps above all, a profoundly generous human being, capable of seeing beauty in questions, in attempts, in unfinished paths, and in the chaotic moments experienced by every researcher. I deeply miss our conversations, his serene presence, and his attentive gaze that always invited us to go beyond the obvious. But I also feel profound gratitude for what we lived together and for what now remains in us, in the pages of this book, and so many others, and in the practice of mathematics education he inspired. Today, by celebrating this book launch, we also celebrate the continuing of Oli's desire, a living, critical, and deeply human mathematics. As I come to the end of my speech, I feel there is nothing more fitting than to honor the one who made this final years possible, Miriam. The writing of this book, the many papers, the classes, the research group meetings, the deep and meaningful dialogues that Oli continued until his final days. None of it would have been possible without Miriam's tireless care. For 6 years, she was by his side, with love, with patience, and with resilience. Even as his body grew weaker, his mind remained bright, and it was Miriam who made it possible for Oli to keep doing what he loved. She held him up when treatments failed. She made room for his voice when illness tried to silence it. And in every moment, until his very last breath, she was there. Miriam didn't just stand beside Oli. She became part of his journey, part of his work, and part of legacy he left behind. To her, we offer our deepest gratitude and also gratitude to Oli for all work he offered to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The next person who has the floor is Renata.
Hello, everyone. So, can you see my screen, my presentation? I'm not seeing it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, you're good.
Thank you. Okay, so as Amanda did, I'm not going to talk much about the book itself. I'm going to talk about what we did behind the scenes while all those books were being built over these past few years. Because in the last few years, we don't know exactly how, but Ole found the strength to be even more productive. So as we all know that. And something that we also know is that he usually he used to listen to his interlocutors very seriously, no matter who he was talking to, no matter was a master student or a graduate student or a very experienced researcher. So he was always taking everyone very seriously. So these courses was becoming very important for this process of producing his last books and ideas and so on. And when I joined this, I work in a peripheral university. So all my students, they are teachers and they have like 40, 50 classes per week. And they find a very tiny space in their time to watch these classes. And for them, it was almost revolutionary having only teaching them a course because they they said I was not aware that we were able that we deserve this kind of education because they said we just came for a peripheral university where those who fail goes. This is the idea inside them, their foreground when they first come to this campus. And then they saw only on the screen teaching them and taking their thoughts seriously. And I mean, you can figure right now that I'm talking something, but the slides are bringing another message. That's a way to make my 5 minutes become 10. So so in the last moments, it was really inspiring to see how he decided to, okay, I'll make the most with the time I have. So he was very much aware that his time was running out. So he was running out to finish his work as well. But at the same time, he was giving us some clues to say something like, okay, if I'm not finished this, then you go on. I mean, like this, for example, giving us ideas to move on, as Paola said. Uh, and as you read, I suppose, in this final time he went to the hospital. So because he was going and coming back so many times that we thought, okay, this is just one more time. He will be back. The students are all waiting. They want to present their final work to Ole, of course, because they want to listen his comments and so on. And half class managed to do that, but the other half of class did not. And then I said, okay, let's postpone this class to the next year when he's better. Then he comes and he can listen to the presentation. But unfortunately, that was not possible because this last visit, he did not came back. And then we have this feeling that, okay, this course never ended. We never had this last class. So in a way, it was poetic because you see, he did not plan this, of course, but his last day healthy was teaching. It was more than that. It was listening to teachers. So for me, this is very strong. Okay, so this is the last PowerPoint presentation he ever sent to Amanda and I. And those are his actual last two slides. So these two green slides, I copied this from his own presentation. And he was in the end worried about hunger in the world. He was not eating. He couldn't. He was being fed with, I mean, in a medical way. I don't know. I'm not going into this, but he was worried about hunger in the world, and he gave the students more to explore in the future. So this is his actual last slide presentation. His actual last slides. And I decided I would like to share it with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Renato.
Thank you. Thank you. All right.
And David, you're up. Yes.
I'm up.
And so I'm presenting David Bowers, Dr. David Bowers, as our last sort of content speaker here. I'll continue to monitor the questions. I'm noticing the ones we have in. Just looking at the time, I'm going to save them, but I am aware of them. So thank you all for putting them in there. Okay,
So
Dr. Bowers.
after I talk, we're going to bring Nikolai on
Yes.
as a panelist, and Nikolai is going to have space to say a few words.
That's right. Yep.
Okay. Whew. Okay. Deep breaths. Maintain my sense of composure to the extent that I'm ever capable of doing that. So I'm going to take a moment to talk not about philosophy or criticality or mathematics or education per se, but instead about community and about feeling seen and feeling heard. I'm going to talk about how Ula impacted me and the trajectory of my being, and how his impact shaped who I might yet become, even prior to us having actually met. I'm going to talk about what I consider one of the most important impacts of a book like Critical Philosophy of Mathematics, but also more broadly, I'm going to try to talk about the power of Ula's words and spirit. I've written and rewritten this dozens of times already. I feel Ula's absence powerfully, but I also continue to feel his presence. A loving spirit whose embrace I felt before meeting and continue to feel into the present. I'm filled with thoughts, filled with feelings, filled with moments and eternities. It is so much, too much to condense into words. All failures of philosophy are failures of language. This is a tension that I live with, that I feel now as strongly as ever I have felt it before. Central to Ula's work and voice was a humanizing spirit, or a post-humanizing spirit. So I'm going to try to phrase this story through a tale of my own shifting humanity. But as I speak of myself, know that what I'm really speaking about is Ula's impact on more than me. For I am but a single element of the massive set of people who have felt, sometimes unknowingly, Ula's impact. With that in mind, consider two people, polar opposites, yet somehow both me. Towards the eastern end of the United States is the Appalachian mountain range. These mountains are old. Their formation begun some billion years ago. And in a way that I can't quite describe, you can feel the weight of time as you stand amongst them. It is as though you are standing among the graves of giants, worn and weathered from an age long past. Do not whistle in these mountains, for you know not what hears you, and be cautious if you hear your name on the wind, for you know not what calls you or why. Appalachia is beautiful, and it is my home of homes. Communities in Appalachia tend to be deeply impoverished, at best neglected, and at worst actively destroyed by the powers that be. We are outcasts, for we dared to stand against power. The Battle of Blair Mountain was the largest labor uprising in U.S. history. The coal barons wanted everything our communities had to give, took all that they could, and our communities stood up to them. And when we stood up to them, they mowed us down with heavy artillery and dropped fire on us from the skies. To this day, the people of our land are left impoverished and without support, except what support and community we build and give to each other. Born into this community is a young David, deeply disabled and with a deeply queered experience of the world. Even at a young age, it quickly became clear to me that I was not safe being myself, especially after I left Appalachia when my family moved to the Midwest. I saw how people who were autistic like me, whose sincere selves were like mine, were treated, and I felt anger at the injustice, but also a powerful loneliness. Other folk seemed not to see the injustice, seemed numbed to its omnipresence. These feelings were magnified at school. Mathematics, holistically, had bestowed upon me both wonders and horrors, both through my experiences of this stultifying exercise-based classrooms contra these moments of wonder and joy, but also more broadly through my experiences of either being empowered or subjugated by it, be it through the rhetorical power of mathematics or through the role it plays in eugenics and capitalistic violence. As Freire said, when education is not liberating, the dream of the oppressed is to become the oppressor. In that context I found myself within, I felt myself struggling between two possible futures. Would I fight that which hurt me, or would I become it? For a time, it seemed that I might become what I hated. I still struggle to look back on some of those moments of my teen years and early adulthood where I was painfully, visibly falling into this trap. Indeed, the numbness I perceived in those around me seemed somehow infectious, blinding, leaving only that one possible future. Yet, a part of me still dreamed of a better world. When I first encountered Ule's words, I was a teacher in training, and his words affected me in a way that I did not fully understand at the time. I read his words and I felt heard, I felt seen, and I felt hope and understanding in a way I couldn't articulate. I felt for a moment that numbness abate, and in its place I felt possibility. Some years later, when I returned to graduate school, Ule's voice was still echoing in my head. It echoes there still. Most research does not recognize reality as it exists within my lived experiences. Most research does not dream. The researchers dream, or I assume they do, but their text holds no dream, no longing for a better world. So many researchers I read and I felt nothing, for their text felt nothing. Only the oppressor within me felt affirmed within this glut of superficial reaffirmations of hegemony. But Ule's voice was different. And it spoke to that other part of me, the hurt and scarred part of me that society had tried to bury. His voice recognized my lived reality, and it spoke to my dream of liberation. He hadn't planted that seed, but his words nurtured it, gave it what it needed to grow, and I began to feel less alone. I began to find community, to build community, and I continued to read Ule's work, and I began to find others who were also dreaming and acting on those dreams. I feel Ule's absence powerfully, yet he is still here with me. He is here with me as I dream, as I love, as I fight, and he is still here with each of you as well, or you wouldn't be here today. And there are so many others who will yet be nurtured by his loving spirit. Critical Philosophy of Mathematics is a fantastic text. It's insightful, critical, radical, thoughtful, and loving, and it dreams, just as Ule did. It gave me permission, Ule gave me permission to dream in a moment where I didn't realize I had closed off that part of myself. And I am but one of many, certainly not the first, and absolutely not the last. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So we're gonna, let's see, I need to promote, hang on a
I got
second.
him.
And Miriam Penteado is actually going to speak for a few minutes after Nikolai. So let's find, where's Miriam in the list here? Miriam Penteado, okay, promote to panelist. And then did we get Nikolai promoted? Let's see. There is so many people on this list. Here we go. Nikolai, promote to panelist. Here we go. Okay. All right. So next is Nikolai Skovsmose, Ole's son. Nikolai, take it away. You're muted. Let me unmute you. Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you to all of you from the panelists, you, Paul, Paula, Alexander, and David, for giving me the opportunity here to say a few words at this commemoration and the launch of Ole's book. I will take a little bit different approach because you have spoken very much deeply about Ole's academic work, but I would like to start out with express also how he was as a father. And on behalf of my sister Lee and I would like to first of all express our heartfelt gratitude to all of you who is here today to remember Ole, both from his academic side and also for the private and personal sides. And it is also for me and Lee is a deep admiration and emotion that I speak here today to all of you. I know there's a lot of people, so thank you very, very much. I want to start out to say that as a child, I remember how often we traveled to Greece. And no doubt that Ole was drawn by his fascination with ancient Greek philosophers. And I remember seeing Acropolis. I remember to visit the different places in Greece. And we also often, because we were children, had to visit the beaches. And there at the beach, we built airplanes, Ole and I, in the sand. And Ole would shape the fuselage and with care, of course. And I would gather stones and seashells, arrange them into dashboards filled with imaginary buttons and instruments. And I must say there was quite a joy in those moments, a deep playfulness, a boundless imagination, and he saw the world not only as it was, but also as it could be. And I think that for somehow his ability also to put himself into different people's place, here in this case, his children, and to imagine together with us and to listen to us seriously, mirrored also the way he treated everyone, with attention, with kindness, and with respect. And today we will remember Ole not only what he has achieved, because today we can hear a lot about what he did in his academic career, but also for how he made us feel inspired, seen, encouraged, challenged also, but most of all, always supported. I will miss him deeply. But I know also his voice in his books and his painting will give me great comfort also in memory Ole. And I must say also that thank you for also everyone in Brazil who took so good care of our father in the last years. That means a lot to Lee and I. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Renato, and thank you to everyone there in Brazil. And thank you always also to everybody here today. I will never forget that how deeply and how good that you have spoken and worked together with Ole. So thank you again, and I know that time is limited. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Nikolai. It was beautiful. Miriam.
So, good afternoon. I read few words here, okay? So, It's an honor for me to join the celebration of Oli's last book published. As was said here, writing was the very heart of Oli's life. For him, writing was not only a way to express his ideas, but also a source of strength and healing. He, in fact, wrote with passion, and he had a very systematic way. And here I have just a page where he did some correction of this book, which is launched today, because after he did it in the computer, he had to print. I printed for him, then he had to write. So I have all this material with me, and it's really a way that it's very nice. It's like he was painting, you know, when he was doing the book writing. It's the same process. He loved sharing, as it was said here, his manuscripts with others, inviting comments and suggestions from colleagues and friends all over the world. He always did this. He truly believed in the power of dialogue and the collective thinking. I deeply miss Oli's physical presence, and take part in the events like this, helping us honor his life, honors our stories together. It brings me comfort to see his idea being celebrated and being inspiration from so many people. As Paola said, Oli did not like to have followers, or as he did not say, I have this theoretical background, etc. He always used the inspiration. And this is also what he wanted. He hoped to be the inspiration, but not followers. As long as we remember and continue to share and reflect on his words, Oli is with us. Thank you all for keeping his spirit alive. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miriam. Well said. David, do you want to, we can do questions and answers before my closing comments. What do you think? Sound good?
Yeah. 5 or 10 minutes, see what kinds of questions we can get through. One of them is targeted to one person in particular, but a lot of the others are more open-ended, I think, where anybody could potentially respond.
Yeah, so we can, I agree. Let's do where was it? Was it for, which one was directed? Was it for Karen, that one?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was, sorry, that it was directed to me, but I sent already an answer.
Yeah, I see
I
it.
would love to talk to the student of the person that called for me.
Okay, we have one question here. One way mathematics formats the academic world is through academics that see authorship, for example, as production and production as a main value. This often shapes how research is organized. Maybe we should think about more participative research in our field, shifting the value from authorship to connectedness. Any comments or responses from the panel? I know I'll address that in my closing remarks as well, so.
We live in an era, a neoliberal era, where acceleration, individualism, competition are overwhelming every form of life, including academia. You know, I'm glad to be out the rat race in a way when I see it's not just the number of publications, the status of them, the size of the grants you get, the money. They count the money. If you get, the bigger the grants you get, the more valuable you are. And yet forget that money grants is just a means to an end. It's just a tool for research. It's not an end in itself. And yet, so we've all lived through that or living through it. Some of us no longer have to live through it because we're retired. But yes, even academia, and of course the doctors felt it. It went through the medical system and social services. Everything has been turn into checklists. Get rid of the experts and get in the cheapest people who can tick all the boxes. So that's enough from me.
Karen.
I would love to immediately go into the suggestion that we co-publish all the things we are doing. And actually, it's also playing with the game. But if you co-author, then everyone benefit from the content. So,
thank you, Karen. Let's see.
Paola, you want to add some thoughts?
If I may, you could say that Ole published quite a lot. Well, that is evident, right? And he was very good for the business of Aalborg University of filling all these bibliometric points for that point of view. However, he would always say, and he used to say to me, but why are you doing all these ridiculous administrative things that people are asking you to do instead of concentrating in writing? Because your writing will always stay and it will stay forever. And I think that the best proof of that kind of power that Ole already practiced, even though he earned a lot of money for Aalborg University, at the same time, his writing did what you are asking in the question. And the proof is what David just said. I think that he moved immense amount of people. I came to Denmark to be here because of his writings, David. And because of that, I'm also now here with all of you, and we are together. So somehow, yeah, let's write more, but to connect, not to produce money for our universities.
Well said, Paola. Thank you. Let's see. Ole's, this is about neo-colonial theory. His breadcrumbs left for the neo-colonies of knowledge like India, Indonesia, and other Souths, which are forcefully being conformed into the international standardized tests, are primarily that question everything. For example, when ethnomathematics was forced upon the South to work in a particular way of knowledge production to be later incorporated into the hegemonic knowledge, it was Ole's writing that kept us in check. I think we need to keep Ole's voice alive, particularly in the global South. Any comments? And I'll just remind the attendees, please put questions into the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen.
I can say something. I don't know if it's going to be adequate. And I did notice that answered questions are probably not truly and fully, completely answered, in case you want to go there. Yeah, I mean, I like this question because I think it draws us down to specific locations and particular political contexts. And I think that that's a really important thing. So I like the fact that this person has, emphasized that to sort of point to how Ole will help us do that. And I think the challenge for critical math education is to try and make sure that it is really responsive in that way to current concerns. And so, in fact, I do want to bring up another question that did get lost in the answer section, which is like, how does the critical math education research or critical philosophy of mathematics grapple with very current geopolitical developments, some of which Peter mentioned very nicely earlier, and the kind of authoritarianism that we see surfacing, and the position of mathematical practices being kind of moved around a little bit in these contexts. So the kind of geopolitical question, I think, that's coming up here is a great one for all of us. Not an answer, sorry.
Yeah, very good point, Liz. Very, very good point. Let's see. Here's another question. How do you manage to teach mathematics in a multicultural classroom? For example, do you think it will be a challenge to have a subject of Gaza to Jewish students. I think just multiple conflicting sort of social identities in the classroom at the same time. How does critical math education manifest in that sort of a role? I know maybe I should answer that because I'm an American, based on what's happening right now. So I know that we're fighting very, very actively right now in the US to protect the university as the agora. And that's very difficult to do. But I do find daily inspiration in what Oli has taught me over the years, even if it's something that he just told me one time. But I seem to remember lots of things, such as just opening up space for dialogues and comments and questions. As simple as that is, if I meditate on that, it makes the task a lot more doable, a lot more approachable in the American context right now. So this is something that's very in the forefront of everybody's minds here right now. Yeah. I would just say I meditate on Oli's work to do that. And his insights are very powerful in that sort of regard, trying to maintain an agora in an educational space. Let's see, David, can you see any other questions that would be good for the last 4 minutes? Maybe I should just say my closing comments.
I think with the last 4 minutes, that's probably the smoothest choice.
So I've been sitting over here. Hi, everybody. I don't have slides for right now. I do in just a second, but just to introduce myself again, I'm Alexander Moore. I'm at Westfield State University in Massachusetts, USA. I've been sitting here listening to all of these presentations, and I've been re-editing what I was going to say because I've been influenced by some other people's, and I'm like, oh, I remember this thing that Oli taught me that one time, and oh, I remember this, and so I was just like, oh, I need to talk about that, and now my papers are all like marked up, and it's like, well, that's a totally different talk now. So I just want to remind us of one other book that Peter and Karen both talked about, which is this. Oops, let me stop the share. I meant to click on this one here. Okay, this book. I want to do my last little minute here with a story in Oli's style, right? He loved to teach us things through stories, and so I'm going to try to do that. 6 years ago, I was just starting my PhD, so I'm a baby in this group, believe me, and I recognize what Paolo was saying, that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, many of whom are here today, so thank you for everything that all of you've done for me over my career. 6 years ago, I was starting my PhD, and of course, one of the first things that you have to do is become familiar with the literature, right? Reading everything and anything you can find to see what's already been done. It's a pretty broad process, but somehow or another, I came across this book in the middle of it. What a text. I remember it distinctly. The title intrigued me, and I love this picture on the front. And what the heck does opaque stories about learning mean? Everything else that I was reading seemed to know exactly what learning was. So how is a mathematics educator writing about opaqueness? I'll never forget how severely the book impacted me. In it, Oli describes his interviews with students at a school in Sao Paulo. The interview consisted of some rather unexpected questions. While other studies that I was reading asked very technical, precise questions, Skovsmose and his PhD student, Deneville, with whom the research was conducted, asked questions such as, what do you think about going to school? What are your dreams and hopes for the future? What do you think about mathematics? What do you like to do with your friends? Here in black and white text, as plain as day, I had a research study, an academic text that was asking the same questions I ask my students at the beginning of any semester. These questions always seem to help me understand my students better because I have no control over their desire, and I shouldn't even want to, but that's a lecture for another day. So why not ask my students directly and let them speak their own truth? The students in the book were answering things like, "Oh my God, mathematics is hard," and "Someday I hope to become a football player or work in a supermarket." Such responses are rarely seen in our literature in our field because we typically hear the same old complaints. Where is the mathematics in this? This has nothing to do with mathematics education. Honestly, this has always confused the hell out of me. Our entire enterprise is supposedly focused on our students. So we should be asking our students directly what they think about it. And here in these pages, Skovsmose was doing exactly that. And I was a greenhorn. I was a novice researcher at this point. And here I'm reading someone doing this, and this is one of the many things that Ole has taught me. He continues in the book talking about how people are complicated, how we contradict ourselves all the time, how we're uncertain. And he clarifies that this is not something to be remedied. I always tell my pre-service teachers, there is no content to teach. There's only people to teach. I'm not a mathematics educator for robots or computers. I do not concern myself with what our field would look like if conditions were perfect. I still to this day don't understand the point of such questions. I face real students every day with all their diversity and experiences, with all their complications and uncertainties. And when I think about what literature I should read to inspire me in how to work with my students, Ole's work always registers as genuine, reliable, and pertinent. Skovsmose ends Foregrounds with a paragraph that has stuck with me to this very day. In it, he recounts the names of the 4 participants of the study, the 4 students he interviewed, one of whom was named Carlos Henrique. He recalls the students' answers to the question, "What do you dream about your future?" He asks rhetorically if the students will still be pursuing the same dreams today as they spoke about during the interview. And then he closes the book with the following, and I will say I have a hard time reading this without getting emotional, and I've read this so many times and I've taught it in so many classes. I'm going to paraphrase, but it's the last paragraph of Foregrounds. There's no way to know what the students are up to these days. It wasn't part of the research plan to contact them for a follow-up. Certainly, had I run into them on the streets of Sao Paulo, I would have spoken to them. In fact, one time I did see Carlos Henrique riding by on a bike at full speed. He was smiling, but where he was going to, I have no idea. I don't know if it's just me, but those last 2 sentences contain some of the richest philosophy that exists today. Every time I walk into a classroom, I repeat to myself, I'm here bearing an invitation to mathematics, and that's from Ole. So I think about him multiple times a day. I'll be teaching a course on the philosophy of mathematics in a couple of years, and the primary text I've already decided will be Critical Philosophy of Mathematics. A day where I cannot ask myself what would Skovsmose say would be a very sad day indeed, and today certainly is sad. I'm so honored that Nikolai is here, and I'm so honored that Miriam is here. I do not share your style of pain today, but I have a lot of it of my own. This book that we celebrated today reminds me of all of Ole's greatest hits. And these are compiled in one place with tons of new extensions, ideas, and intentionalities to give it a particular status as a novel philosophy. And that's rare. That's a rare task, and Ole achieved it. And this book, like Ole, is irreplaceable. I think Ole knew something that a lot of us don't know. And at least for me, I'm going to continue attempting to learn the nuances of what he has tried to teach me. Ole, you're here in spirit. I mean, look at all of these people. How many lives have you shaped? You are here with us. You are here in us. And one thing you taught me to ask is, am I seeing the cage? I think about a saying that my mom loves to say is, how can a bird that was born for joy sit in a cage and sing? Well, Ole, I'm sad that you are your time in this world has passed, but I'm grateful for what you have left us. You've left us with the encouragement to sing in the midst of cages. So with the greatest gratitude that I have, I want to say thank you, Oli, for everything that you've taught me and us. Thank you all for coming today to this very special event. If you're interested in our future offerings, please visit our website and sign up for our mailing list. The recording will be available as soon as I can get around to it.
Go ahead, Renato.
Just 30 seconds.
Yes.
Just because you showed that book foreground, and that picture in the cover was a request Oli made to me so I could take this picture, because I am an amateur photographer.
Wow.
So when he was writing this book, we had long talks, and I actually found our email exchanges while he was choosing the pictures. And in the end, he looked at this one and he said, "This is the one. This is